Good morning, friends. Well, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know when you're watching this. It's morning for me. I don't want to create any illusion. It's clearly morning. See, there's a clock right there. I am coming to you today, this morning, and whenever you're receiving this, I can't speak to, but because I want to talk a little bit more about that textbook thing. We've talked a lot about the textbook, but sort of in hushed tones. Maybe not hushed. I don't really hush a lot. So I've been talking about it in loud tones, but not very much. And today I want to go into a little bit more of the basics of what I'm thinking for this. So as I've already stated in a few different mediums to you, I want to write a textbook this year with you. What my plan is for us to compose together, each of us taking on a section, is to compose a creative writing textbook. My impetus for this is that when I went out into the world and looked for creative writing textbooks, I found some interesting things. I'm sharing sections of things from you. That one essay that I shared and I mentioned briefly in class that I'd like you to keep up with, that came from a book that is composed of formal academic essays about the teaching of creative writing. And I think that's great. And we're going to look to that. We're going to read from that. We're going to learn from that. But what I'm thinking is a creative writing textbook that maybe is more in the line of the more traditional learning to write creatively textbooks that we'll encounter. In fact, I've attached to this lecture an essay, more of a chapter from a book. It is Imaginative Writing by Janet Burroway. This is a textbook that I've used in creative writing classrooms in the past. And I included for you the first chapter, Invitation to the Writer. Now, the reason why I've included this is because I think the information in it is relevant for us. We're coming at it differently. We're not learning to write creative writing. We're learning to teach it. But I think the information that Burroway includes in here is relevant and useful for us. But one of the other reasons I wanted to include this is because I think it works as an interesting template for what our textbook could be, with the visual layout, what the sort of aesthetic of it could be. I showed you and I shared that essay that I discussed in class last week, and that had a very academic, formal structure to it. That was an academic essay. It was well sourced. It was well cited. It was formal. Again, great. We need to learn from things like this. But as a textbook, I think a style like that might not work for most students. I think the style that Burroway uses in this book will. And as we look at it, you can see she's got these little gray inset boxes that provide sample exercises. She has a number of headings that kind of set up, let me actually show you a page that has them, that show what's about to be discussed. She will have a series of exercises throughout this. This comes even more into play as the book goes on. Very few visuals, but some, we can play with that in ours. But I wanted us to have this just to get a sense of what we could be doing. Because I envision our textbook to have exercises that could be used as sample exercises in the classroom, or prompts and ideas that the aspiring teacher can use to further her own creativity, his or her own creativity. So this is my vision for it, is that we can have these extra aspects to it that'll help spur the creativity of the book. I don't want this to just feel like a series of academic papers. I don't think that necessarily works in a textbook, at least from my own experience. So what I want to talk to you today is our basic structure for it. I want to start to compose a table of contents, essentially, for what we'll be doing. And I want each of you to, I guess for lack of a better term, sort of propose what you want to discuss in this. And as you know, most textbooks are going to be structured based on subjects as they go on. As I'm looking at the Burroway book, it begins with Chapter 1, an introduction to the invitation to the writer, and it talks in that chapter about you and writing, you and reading, you in this book, you in this journal. Chapter 2 is about images, so now it's getting more specifically into specific writing techniques, images. Chapter 2 is composed of images and the imagination. Chapter 3 is built around the concept of voice, and Chapter 4 on character. So you can see how each of these chapters are kind of doing different things in this way. Well, I think ours can do that too. And I want to talk to you about how you want to structure it, because as I say that I've come up with this idea, I have some things that I think need to be in it. But I really want this to be something that we create and we construct and we build together. And so I haven't written anything. I envision that I'll obviously do the editing and work with you, and we'll edit each other. And I'll write a preface, an introductory chapter. I think that seems reasonable. But then we'll start to do things on our own. And I'm curious to see what kind of thoughts you have. Would you feel like the best way to structure this would be based on like teaching certain genres and certain backgrounds? Am I going to ask perhaps somebody to talk about teaching fiction, somebody else to talk about teaching poetry, somebody else to talk about teaching creative nonfiction, somebody else still maybe playwriting or screenwriting? Are we going to structure it that way? Are we going to structure it based on level? Are we going to talk about how we teach pre-K, K through 12, breaking it down into elementary and secondary, somebody else looking at early college, somebody else talking about levels higher than that? Do we want to talk about different ways of teaching creative writing in the community in addition to that? Do we want to talk about outside of the school area? Does somebody want to talk about maybe techniques that could be used for working with creative writing in prisons or working with creative writing in nursing homes, something like that? Do we want to break it down that way? Do we want to try to capture all of that? There are a lot of us. And so there are many of us who can get into this. Maybe we can talk about teaching poetry in the elementary schools, and somebody else can talk about teaching fiction in elementary schools. Maybe somebody can talk about teaching the actual act of creative writing to high schoolers, and somebody else can talk about how we teach the works of creative writing to high schoolers, which I think is an important difference and something that's really worth distinguishing. Obviously, there are a lot of ideas that are out there. What I wanted to do right now is just kind of give you an opportunity to propose a chapter, for lack of a better term, something that you think might work. Now, you might think, I've asked you to write, I think, 20 pages, 15 to 20 pages, something like that, about your subject matter. And you might think, well, gosh, what am I going to say for 15 to 20 pages if I'm talking about how to teach creative nonfiction to high school students? Well, think about it. You can talk about basic techniques that a teacher in that situation could use. You can also talk about strategies that teacher could use in those situations. So this isn't just going to be a pep talk. This is going to provide, in my mind, very clear and concrete examples of things that you can do to further that teacher's ability to communicate with the students along. That prompt that I just posted last night, I hope you've had a chance to look at it. That's one where I've asked you to write a writing exercise at the level that you feel comfortable with. I know some of you don't really envision yourself as teachers at this point. Most of you do, but some of you don't. So if you do envision yourself as a teacher, I want you to come up with a writing exercise, a creative writing exercise that would work with the level that you're at. If you're somebody who's not really seeing themselves as a teacher, pick anything. Pick college, because maybe that's where you are now and that's what you feel most comfortable with. But I want you to think about an exercise like that proposal that I've asked you to do, in which I'm asking you to come up with an exercise, and also come up with reasons why that exercise would be effective. And put that into the textbook too. All the exercises that we come up with, we can absolutely translate into the chapter that you're working on. Remember what most of our textbooks do, especially creative writing textbooks. They'll provide a couple of paragraphs of information and ideas and technique, and then they're going to give you a section that gives you an exercise to play with on your own. In the Burroway book, she talks about it as a try this. Other books will give you sample sections and things like that. A lot of creative writing textbooks obviously are going to give you sample poems and sample stories. We can do that too. If one of your exercises includes a pre-existing poem or story, we can absolutely include that. If we decide to take this further and look at a publisher or something, we can work that out now. But at this point, we're not worried about that. So if there's a particular poem that you want to use, then you can do it. Like in my creative writing classes, I usually take a poem on the first day and then ask the class to write an imitation. And then we talk about the value of imitations. We read some text and handbooks that kind of follow up on the value of writing imitations. And that's an exercise that we do. And we're doing it by looking at a specific poem, a poem that I've chosen because I think it has something that is eminently imitatable about it. And I vary what the poem is from time to time. But I want you to think about exercises that you can do in that way. So there are ways to fill up that space that's going to be really, really valuable for us. And it's not just going to be you writing for 20 pages about what your section is. I hope that makes sense. So I'm kind of curious about what your thoughts are on this. And what I'd love for you to do is in the comments below, maybe write down some thoughts you have on how we can structure this. As I've said, I purposefully am very vague on this at this point because I really want this to be something that we create together. I know that we can do something pretty remarkable if we work together and figure it out. So what I'd like you to do is maybe give some ideas of the types of things that you think would need to be in a textbook like this. Your suggestions on how we can format it and how we can set up our table of contents, and also start providing maybe proposals of things that you think you can do. At this point, I'm not worried about the order or the structure. I just want to get some ideas, and we can figure that stuff out as we go. So if somebody wants to say, I would love to write a section on how to best teach a love of creative writing poetry in the elementary school classroom by sharing the works of certain authors. And here's what I think we should do. Then do that. If you want to say, what I'd love to do is teach basic screenwriting techniques to high school students. Here's what I would want them to look at. Here's what we would do. Here's some exercises we would do. Here's why I think it would be valuable. Then let's go with that. I've had experience in a lot of these different areas. I can walk you through it. I've done poetry workshops, if we can call it that, with 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds at preschools before. So I've had a lot of experience at various levels. And so I can definitely walk you through and talk about a lot of these things. But right now, I want us to start just basic proposals of ideas that we've got, as I said, and also maybe suggestions on how we can format it. I just want to make sure that this feels like yours and that we're building it together. So down below in the comments, let's put down some ideas, put down some proposals. I'll pop in and I will give you feedback and ideas, and I'll try, as I'm looking at the suggestions you're giving me, to start composing a table of contents that we can hopefully have together over the next week, at least in some form, and then obviously more structured as the weeks go on. So let's start working on this. Let's start coming up with ideas, and then we will meet up on Canvas with conversation, and then obviously meet up in class next week and just see where we've gone. So I look forward to having conversations with you on Canvas, and we will talk in the future. Thanks.